Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of On the Run with Beards and Dunn. And it's January now, Beards 2025, and I can't imagine what is the weather like in Bemidji, Minnesota.
Well, it's actually pretty nice. It was only like 5 below 0 this morning, and
Okay,
there's not
that's
much
pretty
wind.
nice. Okay,
Well,
that's pretty
the
nice.
other day we had about 3 4 days every morning. It was like 20 to 25 below 0 actual temperature. And
Oh
now
Lord.
you live in Weaverville, North Carolina, and I saw in the weather you guys might get a big snowstorm there in the next couple days.
Yeah, I've learned out here in the mountains, you can't really predict the weather all that accurately. They're getting better
No,
at it all the time.
Yeah.
But they've predicted rain so many days, and I'd say, I'm not going to get a bike ride in today, and it'll be gorgeous out. It might be on the other side
right?
of the mountain or something. But let's get to our guest. We have another guest
Oh,
with us today,
so
and
excited.
and me too, because this guy basically is my neighbor, and we've never had a chance. I've been here about a year now, and I've known of John Conley and his wife Stacy for many, many years because they're excellent friends, best friends with Dick and Jill Beardsley. And I think Jill knew John and Stacy before Dick was in the picture
Oh
through the
yeah.
Yeah,
Austin
long
Marathon.
time.
And so when we were talking about a guest to bring on the show, Dick said, he says, hey, this John Conley, and I remember the name, and he goes, they were the directors, or he directed. Stacy, I think, was probably your unpaid assistant of the Austin Marathon, and it kind of really got me thinking. I've never really understood how, and I think he said they sold their share or their portion or the marathon to a different company, and I'm going, they sold it. You mean they owned a marathon? And so that really, I don't know if a lot of runners know how the management and logistics of big time road racing in the US, in the world, goes on. So I think it's a great, Dick said, well, I've got the perfect guy.
Oh
And, and then when he found out
yeah.
he lives in Weaverville. We had Doug Curtis on a few months back. Doug Curtis also lives in Weaverville, and Doug Curtis has a relationship, which I think John can share here in a few minutes, with the Austin Marathon. And so talk about coming together full
I know.
circle or something
I
like that. But
know.
but anyway, that's what I know about John Conley. Is he's a former marathon director, a big time marathon director, and now he works as a consultant, I think, with other marathons. And so, Dick, what's your take on John Conley?
Well, yeah, of course, I've known John now for, oh my gosh, a long, long time. In fact, John, you brought me to the Austin Marathon to speak. Was it like 2000, 2 years in a row? Was it 2004, 2005? I know one of the years it was the ice storm.
Oh, that would have been '06. Was
Okay, so I think I came in 205 or 2005 and then 2006.
that sounds about right?
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tell you, I back then I had been to a lot of marathons, and gosh, just to see John how well you and Stacy and your staff put on this big event, and then getting to know you, and then actually I've met my wife Jill, who's a good friend, one of Stacy and her are like best buds, and so I had to live down there for a little bit, when Jill and I first got married, and so I would always be at the marathon every year, helping a little bit I could, and usually riding in the press truck
Yeah.
uh, with John, and kind of I would be in charge of some little detail. But John, to see you and your staff, the way you ran that race, it was like a gosh dang drill sergeant. Tell us how you got involved, and how, I mean, that race went from kind of a small race to where you're getting between the half and the full. You're pushing 20,000 runners coming to Austin.
Yeah. 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 I know it's sometimes it's hard to remember back to the '90s when I first started event management in Austin. I was a transplant to Austin. I'm not from Texas, and although I lived there for almost 30 years, I happened to just end up in Austin at the right time. You hear this all the time. It sounds really trite. Right
Right?
time, right place, and there was a nexus of running with this running store called Runtex, and the owner of the store,
Yes.
Paul Carosa, had created this community of runners from all over the area. And it included people like Michael Dell, Dell Computers, the governor.
Right.
Um, he even had President Bush there once. I mean, so there was this incredible culture and community that was there when I arrived in Austin. And I was not a race director. In fact, I was a child psychiatric nurse at the time. And so I was working in the mental health industry, but I was still running. And this agency I worked for had just lost its funding. There was a grant that got pulled. And of course, back in the 90s, people thought putting on a road race was the way to make money. And so
Right.
to replace that grant money, they decided to put on a race. And since I was the only runner in this mental health agency, they said, why don't you direct this race? And I thought, well, I had volunteered and I had been a runner for a couple of decades at that point. And so I thought, well, I could do this. And so we started this 10K road race called the Sundown Classic. And it was an evening race because I didn't like waking up in the morning. And it was uh, it was out in the country. So it was pretty far removed from Austin at the time. Now Austin has grown and it's assimilated that area. So I directed this race, and a board member was the HR director for Motorola, a guy named David Doolittle. And David, they had just started the Austin Marathon. And I thought, well, I just started my race. They just started the Austin Marathon. So maybe if we run
Right.
together, start a series. So my race would begin it and the marathon would end it, and we could fill it in with other races. And so that's what we did. We created the distance challenge so that my race, Sundown
Yes.
Classic, could get its feet under it and get going. And so I did that for a few years, and I was still working in mental health. And the race management at the senior levels of Motorola changed just radically overnight one year. And I want to say it was 1996, 1995. And I was asked to come on board, to leave my previous profession, to come on board and direct the Austin Marathon. And
Oh.
Motorola had this incredible machine of volunteers, technical expertise, um, electronic. We were the first race in Texas to do chip timing. I don't remember what year it was.
Wow.
But we were ahead of some of the stuff. We posted live results. We were the first one to do that. We didn't do it well. In fact, I can remember stringing chips. And it gets mind numbing when you do thousands of these chips on these stringers. I don't know if you guys remember that in the old days. You just
Oh
on
yeah.
your shoe. And so I can remember stringing those chips, and I screwed it up. I made a mistake, and it interrupted the award ceremony. And so I'm on the stage, and I'm a brand new race director with this event, and I have screwed it up. And our MC
Uh-oh.
was this HR guy from Motorola, and he started doing stand up comedy because the results were completely wrong. And I had elite athletes who were angry at me. I had men who were coded as women, and it was just a mess. And I could just see
Oh.
crowds leaving. And we had spent, I can't even tell you how much money on rock music. We had this huge stage, and it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. Yet we recovered from that, and the very next year it was an Olympic trials year, and we had a guy named Greg McMillan, who I'm sure you guys have heard of. He had a training program
Yeah.
in Austin at the time, and he said, why don't we do an Olympic marathon um, challenge for American runners who were trying to qualify for the Olympic Games in 2006. And so we did this marathon thing where Coca-Cola sponsored it and Greg directed it, and we brought in I forget how many, like almost 50 uh, American runners who had a potential to qualify for the trials, and we had, I think, 23 qualifiers. So we were only second behind Chicago that year in terms of Olympic trials qualifiers. So disaster, the ice storm. I think Dickie, you were there. We had that
Right.
ice storm.
Yes.
It was the year after the debacle with the chip timing, and or a couple of years after the chip timing debacle, and we somehow pulled it off. We got 23 Olympic trials qualifiers. We got uh, we everything clicked in spite of the ice, deer jumping over our start in the north
I
Boston
know.
area. It was just the craziest convergence of events. And that was when I think I said to myself, I have earned my stripes as a race director. When you have ice,
Absolutely.
400 and something car crashes the morning of the race, radios failed. If anything could go wrong, it did that year. And
John, did the local like city people, the authorities, police, did they come close to saying, you know what, it ain't going to happen?
they would have, except we were in a county that was separate. It was north. We were in Williamson County, and the race finished in Travis County. And at that time, the radio systems between the sheriffs in Williamson County were not conversant with the ones in Travis County, so they couldn't talk to each other.
Oh, oh my
I went
gosh.
to the TV guy and I said, "Hey, I think we're going to have to cancel this race, but we're
Yeah.
definitely going to postpone it, and I have no way to get the word out. So I need you to do it." And the guy was like, "Yeah, I can't do that. I got to check with my producer and all that." So we had no way of communicating to the customer that the race was going to be delayed.
Oh my
We just couldn't
goodness.
talk to the police. We didn't have cell phones back then. You know,
Yeah.
there people had them, but they were big brick things. We didn't have them.
Right.
Our radios, so we had no way to communicate. And I said, "Well, we got critical mass of runners here. Let's start the race." So we did, and I was that year was the year that told me that you really have to approach these events with an eye towards emergency management, large crowd
Yeah.
movements. Um, you don't have control over the weather. You have people there. You got to do something with them. And so it really taught me a lot. So we did an emergency management plan. And I think this was a couple of years before the Boston Marathon bombing. Did an emergency management plan. We did all of this stuff that I pulled from my military background. I spent 10 years in the Army.
Yeah.
And so I just converted my way of thinking about the race into a large military operation, moving
And
moving people from
well,
one
and
place
John,
to the next safely.
oh, and you did a great job. And
It
then
worked.
so it worked. I mean, so when did it become your race, you and Stacy? And I mean, it became that was your full time job. I mean, it had to be because putting on an event like that, and you put on other events too and
Right.
helped with, but that was your kind of your main baby,
Yeah, the founder of the race passed away in 2008, I believe. I'm probably
right?
getting some of the dates kind of wrong. But anyway, he passed away, and it created a vacuum. There was nobody to guide it from an executive level. My
Yeah,
boss had passed away, and Runtex was moving in a different direction. And so the race was sitting
right.
there, and we had already started registration for the next year. So I said to Stacy, my wife, "You want to be a race director full time? Oh, this is it." And so we started Conley Sports. Easiest was
Right.
my name, our name, and we picked up a couple of other events. We did a bicycle event down in Corpus Christi or Port Aransas, Texas. We did anything we needed to do to make money. Uh,
Sure.
that was the bottom line. And Nike at that time, it was 2008, had launched the Nike Human Race. That was the I think
Right.
20 something races worldwide, all supposed to be coordinated for the same day at the same time. So
Yes.
everybody is running in the world at the same time. And so we competed for that. And I don't remember uh, who our competition was, but of course, Chicago, New York, and LA got. And so they were looking for a southern city. So I assume Atlanta, Houston, New
Yeah.
Orleans, Phoenix, those cities were all under consideration too. And we won the contract. So we produced.
Right. I remember
We had
that.
14,900 runners. We had Matthew McConaughey and Jake Gyllenhaal. We had all these stars, coming down. There's a lot of money put into that race. A local guy won it. It was a fantastic event, but it was August 31st, 2008, 100 degrees, 100% humidity.
I was just going to say,
Absolutely,
oofta.
absolutely. It looked like the scene from Gone with the Wind. All these runners collapsed.
Yeah.
And there was a yogurt uh, thing, a little tube of yogurt that you got at the finish line, which I can't imagine anything worse on a hot
No kidding.
down a tube of yogurt. And so you had people throwing up yogurt everywhere. It was a mess. And we were able to work with the police to commandeer some buses. We had city buses just pulled off the street and put in our medical parking lot area as cooling stations. And again, these kind of events just help you organize your thinking about how you're responsible
Yeah.
for these runners. They're paying, in some cases, a couple of $100 plus hotels and their travel, and you want to respect that. You also have this community of runners in Austin that had very high expectations for what this event was going to represent. So you had to live up to those standards. Plus, you had to honor the commitment that these runners were making. And we had the right team. At that point, Motorola
Yeah.
and had changed its name. It was Freescale Semiconductor, then it became NXP Semiconductor. They came and went. Had a couple of different sponsors. And in 09, we lost all of our 2009. We lost all of our cash sponsors. We had no
Oh,
cash except runner entry fees, and there was an error on our budget, the Excel spreadsheet. And I was in New York City at the time with Stacy at the New York City Marathon. This was November. Our race was in February, and I looked at the budget and I said, "Oh man, we're going to lose $250,000. Uh, we're
wow.
done. We're done. We're not going to be able to put on this race in February." So I stayed up literally all night, um, just going over the formulas, and I discovered the error, and I changed the formula, and suddenly all that red turned to green.
Oh,
I
good.
said, without cash sponsors, we're still going to make it. So we were able to pay.
Wow.
We were able to make money that we could sock away. And 2010 was the same thing. We didn't have any cash sponsors, but we had confidence. And when you have confidence, when
Oh, yeah.
you're going to make it, you've got everything ready, and you got the right people. And so 2010, I think, was our benchmark, our high water mark for how to do it without a cash sponsor. And
Well, and John, that's the thing. If you to be successful without cash sponsors, I'm sure that first year you're thinking, how is this going to happen? But if you can pull that off without that, and then all of a sudden you start getting those cash sponsors, man, and that's got to be seem like easy street at that point.
absolutely, it was. We don't take anything for granted because we see how
No,
mercurial businesses are. Uh, Policies change, business strategies change, and the community changed. Austin was growing, and we had a lot of new people coming into the city with different ideas about how the city was going to grow. And Dickie, you were there during that time when the city just
yeah,
exploded in growth.
crazy.
Scrapers drive into town, you count 20 cranes, these skyscrapers
Yeah,
going up. And that changed the way we could run the race. Austin sits in a big bowl. You got mountains on either side, or hills, and you
right.
got the river. And so you're going to be running uphill or downhill in Austin. It's just a fact of life. It's just,
Yep,
just the way it is. If you've been to Pittsburgh, you got to run that giant mountain in Pittsburgh.
same thing, right?
Austin, I don't know too many races other than maybe Chicago or Berlin that are pancake flat.
Yeah,
But we had that challenge, plus we had an emergingly strong neighborhood association and business association community who really wanted to go to war with us. We had all kinds of confrontations. I got challenged to fist fights. I got, oh
really.
yeah, we,
So
People did not.
so they didn't want the race coming through their community or their businesses because they might have to be closed for a half an hour or
Yeah,
whatever.
and it was a Sunday morning, and where we ran was through a lot of the bar districts downtown, all closed on
Yeah,
Sunday morning. So churches were one of our big constituents that we had to pay attention to. Businesses as well, but less so. And communities, community neighborhoods,
sure.
people needing to go to church and that sort of thing. So we had to get real creative about how we were going to manage the neighborhoods. So I had to become a part-time politician, as I'm sure if
I bet.
McGillivray or Kerry or any of these, Kerry Pinkowski or any of these people, spent a lot of time with the mayor and city managers and that sort of thing. So
Right.
I started to move away from running, so to speak. So I had to massage all of these other constituencies. And I really found that to be probably the least fun part of it, was to be a politician, shake
Yeah.
hands, to offer to buy neighborhood, entire streets, breakfast coupons so they could go to breakfast.
Oh my
We ran down
gosh.
their street, that kind of thing, because it was really important that we be a good neighbor. And
Sure.
so we did that, and that became pretty much my job, because we had an infrastructure. We had a team, Danny Spoons and Eli Ash, who went on to direct Twin Cities, I think, and Sacramento. So we had a really good team, and I was just pulled away constantly doing political things, which I really didn't enjoy as much as interfacing with runners. And at the expo,
I bet.
it's the happiest day of my life. It's like the happiest day of the year is marathon weekend. You have all that energy, you see all your work going into this one weekend, and it's like the genie out of the bottle, right? When that air horn goes off or the
Right.
off, it's everybody is just has to do their thing. And we did some things like chartering helicopters so we could manage the neighborhoods. We could see what was happening. We could take pictures from the air. We could show them what was happening on race day when we debriefed with communities. Um, so we incurred a lot of expense, but I think it was worth it. I don't think the new guys, the new owners of the marathon, do any of those things now because I don't think they have to. I think the community.
Well, so John, so let's talk a little bit about that. So, what was it, 2016, 2017, when you and Stacy kind of sold your share or your ownership
Yep.
and decided to move to North Carolina, get out of the race business? Was there any particular reason, or just kind of felt like it was time to move on?
Man, I'll tell you, the biggest reason was my health.
Yes.
I had a hip replacement from necrotizing fascia. I mean, from avascular necrosis. The bow.
What you went through back then, John, was
I fell
unbelievable.
out of the lead vehicle and broke my hip, and I banged my head. A year later, got a subdural hematoma, put me in the hospital, and so I had just had all of these injuries that were just starting to pile up from being a race director.
Right.
Mangled my hand.
That's
I
crazy.
mean,
From being the
yeah,
director, not running it, from being the director.
oh yeah, and Dickie, you've been on those trucks. It's a
Oh yeah.
working truck. It's the command truck. So I sit there with all my radios,
Right.
talking to the helicopter, talking to our tactical operations center.
Now you got 10 things going on at one
We
time.
do, and so I'm managing that, and I'm managing information from that truck, and having the helicopter was a big asset to us. But it was work, and I really enjoyed it. But it took its toll, and
Yeah.
that year was the year when elite not wasn't elite racing. What are they called now? Can't remember. Um, uh, Not elite racing. What are they called? They own
Oh.
Iron Man now, and they
Yeah.
own a whole bunch of
Oh, I can't.
companies change.
Life,
And so companies were actually starting to come around because we were privately owned. Stacy and I owned it at that point.
Right.
And so we had people come to us and say, "Are you interested in selling the race?" And
Yeah.
the initial answer was no. But when I'd wake up in the morning, I'd look at all these scars, and I, I
Right.
counted my scars once. I think I have like 30 something scars. Dickie, Mike, we're all we're
John,
all
you and I would. It's amazing that when we drink a glass of water, it doesn't leak out somewhere on us,
we're all
Well, I
banged
think what
up,
you're talking
you
about is
know.
like Lifetime Sports.
What's that?
right?
What?
Was it like Leadville Trail 100? The
Yeah,
Lifetime Sports. It's like Dirty Can. They don't call it Dirty. They call it Onbound now. All these races that started up as grassroots
yeah,
events. A bunch of gravel guys on bikes said, "Hey, let's do a race from Manhattan, Kansas down. I can't remember. It's 200 miles." And anytime there's like this is going to be really, really difficult. Whenever runners and bikers hear this is really something that could be disastrous, I want in. It's a challenge. And Lifetime Sports came along and they pay, I don't know the numbers, I'm not involved, but big bucks, millions of dollars. And the guys who started it, they had a passion for the sport. They had to kind of maybe then the event outgrew them. They weren't really that.
yeah,
You kind of had to learn the skills. It's sink or swim, John, and you swam very well. You learned to do it, and where Lifetime could come into these events and say, "Look, we're going to take this to the next level. Here's X number of dollars. We'd like to keep you on as an advisor or something
yeah,
like that."
yeah.
Because a lot of people remember John Conley in the Austin Marathon. I don't know if you're still involved at all with the
Well,
race.
and John, so I'm sure you had probably national companies that maybe wanted to buy it, but tell us, you ended up selling it locally to a young man and maybe some other people
Yeah, it
involved.
was a perfect convergence for us because um, I had my health issues that I was concerned about. I also was doing a lot of politicking that I didn't enjoy as much as being around runners and actually seeing the race. And so, when we started having people come around to ask us if we were interested in selling, and there were probably three or four companies. In fact, one flew us out to Aspen to wine and dine, Casey and
Wow.
I, and we didn't follow up on that one. But it was a time when people were buying races, and I never
Right.
thought of a race as a commodity, like selling cars or pigs or corn. But a race is a commodity, and most races at that time were owned by nonprofits, running clubs.
Sure.
Right.
And so to find a privately owned race that was growing, that had, EBITDA, earnings before, what I can't remember what EBITDA is, but that's the value of your company. When we actually did that exercise, we saw that the company was quite valuable and generated a tremendous amount of money for the local Austin community. You know, probably over the span of our 20 years, we're looking at probably 100 million or more in economic impact for the city of Austin.
Wow.
Everybody really understands the value of the marathon. Every major city has a marathon. I mean, they just do. There are
Right.
over 100 and something marathons in this country. And so we had brought it to this level of maturity. It was the 25th anniversary. We had seen it through. Stacy had been part of it since the very beginning. I came on board after I think the third year, and it was um, it was prime. It was ready, and we weren't interested in seeing somebody from outside of the community come in and hire us to produce the race that we used to own. Now they own it.
Right.
We really I wasn't interested in a lot of the national and international groups that were looking at buying the Austin Marathon. And a local guy who actually had been one of our volunteers, Jack Murray, who was absolutely
Right.
worth having on your show. The guy, he's a young man. At that time, he was in his 40s. He was ambitious. He owned several other businesses. He did bicycle work for the Tour de France, and he was just everywhere.
Heck of a nice guy too.
Very nice guy. And he made us an offer we couldn't refuse. So we were able to sell it, keep it local. Um, and retirement was a little disorienting. I don't know. You guys probably what that's like. It's like, well, what do you do now? So the first thing I did was I got sick again. I ended up in the hospital for a month. And that was
Gosh.
2016. And then we moved out here to North Carolina in 2017. So my goal every year is to just stay alive. Not-
At our age now, John, that's the goal for all of us, I think.
yeah,
For the naive people like me, who took races for granted.
Yeah.
As a runner, and especially if you're any level or decent runner, you just figure, hey, I expect to show up, have the course measured and
Yep.
marked accurately. I expect the results to be perfect.
Yep.
I expect there to be food at every or aid
Yeah.
stations, appropriately spaced. You have such a high
That's right.
expectation because, like you said, now maybe the elites don't have to pay all this money, but the average Joe is paying. Back in our day, Dick, what did we pay to run a 10, 15, 20 bucks?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was.
exactly.
It was.
35, I don't know, got up to that, maybe 30, now, you're talking hundreds.
Yeah.
And so, how big a staff, to put on an event, you're the general. As you're talking, John, I guess thinking like, man, this guy, the general has colonels and majors
Yep.
and captains and lieutenants and sergeants. You get down to the private, and so I'm thinking, I was looking at, you got to have your course
Yep.
and, measured, accurate, certified, all of that good stuff. The timing, I don't know how you hire. Now there's companies that do it, and I don't know if you guys did your own or hired that out. Then you get into like the registration process. How do you set up a website, that doesn't crash, that's accurate, that people can get on there, that it has a full description of everything they can expect. I'm looking at food, aid
Yeah.
stations. I know correct me if I'm wrong, John. Are you quite a music buff?
Not anymore, but yes, you have to have entertainment, right? I mean, everybody wants to be entertained.
Well, I just saw on the website somewhere it said John brought in all these different music
Oh
groups
yeah. We,
to your event, and people love that. I remember at Grandma's, you'd go by marching bands.
yeah.
Would be you'd be running, and they'd be out there on the course.
Yeah.
Well, especially
playing.
Austin, it's known for its music and stuff. John, you had to come through with that, didn't you?
How big a staff? How many people does it take to put on and I know you're going to say I have no idea, but I know it's over.
Actually, I have a very good idea. So our company,
What is it?
so Stacy and I were the owners, and then working with us, we had a staff. It sort of varied between 5 and 6 full-time year-round employees. And from the 5 or 6 employees, we had subcontractors that we would have for 3 months, 6 months, in some cases, 1 year contracts with people. So that was about a dozen people. And then below them, you had other people on race day that you paid. So you had probably 100 of them. And then you had police who were off here to the side, and there was about, I want to say, 180, 200 cops, plus sheriffs and state troopers and Capitol Police. So you have a huge law enforcement process that you pay.
Did you have to pay them, or were they just
You have to,
Did you have to pay
yeah,
them?
you pay all of them. And then you
Okay.
have your volunteers, of which there are probably over 1,000, between 1,000 and 200
Wow.
volunteers. And we know this just from the volunteer shirts we have to produce and the waivers that we collect from the volunteers. So on race weekend, it cascades out to just a massive organization, and everybody knows their job. And again, that's kind of where the Army experience comes in, where you have to move, you have a mission to accomplish, you have these people here, they got to be here, and they have to do this job. And so you set up this structure with a chain of command, and the buck always stopped with me if something screwed up. It's because we didn't train properly, we didn't give the volunteer or the contractor the right resources, or we just had bad luck. Sometimes that happens. In my 20 years
Sure.
as a professional race director, I've never had a fatality, ever.
Wow, good for you. And you've had a lot of runners.
Oh, we've had runners
See, I was just
down
thinking,
too. I directed the Capital 10K in Austin for 3.
Yes.
That was, we had 28,000 runners. And we've had people go down, but we're really proud of the fact that we kept our runners safe, we entertained our runner, and we gave them value. I started running in 1971, probably right around the time you guys did. And, it was literally 50 cents. You didn't get a t-shirt. If you ran a race, they got a t-shirt back then. That was a pretty big deal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you didn't get anything. A cup of water or guava juice or something, at the finish.
Oh, right.
And, you'd look for your name in the paper the next day, and there'd be a little article. And, if you didn't place, your name wasn't in there. And that was just normal.
Yes.
I'm now working in Kenya, doing some work with a race director there, and
Yeah, talk about that, John, because that's so interesting. And you were there just not too long ago. Talk a little bit about that, if you
yeah,
would.
I spent a month in Kenya. I had never been to Kenya before, even though we'd worked with athletes for decades, and I know Kenyan coaches and very familiar with the system. And to get there, though, was really interesting because we were on the Indian Ocean side. So we weren't in the big city. We weren't in Nairobi. We weren't where the runners were, which is Iten and Eldoret, and, the Rift Valley area. So we're up in the
Right.
hot Indian Ocean. We're right near the equator. And we're running on an elephant preserve. So you have all kinds of issues, with baboons, raiding water stop. Um, and there's no infrastructure. So you have to make everything. There's no timers, no race timers. So we literally did a version of a card finish. I marked the trail hash style using flour because you can't get chalk there. Um,
Back in the old
it was
days.
exactly like that. And I swear, if you were a race director who just started in 2015, you wouldn't have known what to do.
No, no, not at all.
Guys like us, this is like, oh, we're used
Yeah.
to do races, and it was no problem.
Popsicle sticks.
It was, yeah, it was no problem, and the athletes loved it. And we made peace with the baboons. We let them take the water and the bananas.
Well, John, I saw some of the pictures and stuff, and you're right. I mean, there were baboons, elephants. I mean, and so how did they know of you and say, hey, maybe he could help us put on this race? And how many runners turned out for something like that in an area where there's probably not a lot of runners, like you said?
um, I was approached. I get approached all the time by
I
Kenyan
bet.
runners. I get emails, texts. I don't know how they find me, and they want me to be their manager, a coach. So by get them a
Sure.
visa, and I'm not in that business anymore. I used to be an agent way long time ago, and so I don't do that anymore. But there was this one guy. He wasn't an athlete. He formerly had worked for a high altitude training camp, and he wanted to start a business. This was 2019, and COVID had just hit shortly after that.
Yeah.
And so he didn't have a job anymore because there's no travel, no tourism or anything in Kenya. So he wanted to start his own business. And that's when he reached out to me. We had this relationship online. And because he wasn't asking me for anything, I engaged with him more. And so he invited me to Kenya. But again, COVID was still an issue and there was some political unrest in Kenya. So I didn't go. And I finally decided this year, based on watching this guy's drive to make a living doing essentially what we did, as
Right.
as managers of athletes and all of this. He was trying to do what we did, and so I felt like I could help. I could help coach him, mentor him, and he's doing a great job. So that first event was just a dry run, mostly so I could learn about the
Yeah.
heck is available in Kenya. Here you just call up a race timer. You could, tell you about my Main Street Mile idea, Mike. Um, but in Kenya, you don't have any of those things, but you have a lot of willing runners, but they can't they
Yeah.
can't get to your race because they don't have cars. There's no buses. So we're going to do it again in June. Um, and knowing what I know now, I think we can manage. We can have bigger numbers. So we had 31 finishers, plus X number of baboons and probably a 52. Baboons are everywhere, and so I think we could probably grow it to 100. And
Nice.
he's already got a 500,000 shilling sponsor, which is about $3,000 US, and that's pretty good money there for a sponsorship. So I
Yeah.
think we're gonna make some progress, and I'm gonna go back to Eldoret, big training camps there, and then E10. See if we can recruit some of these runners that have been after me for years. See if I can recruit them to come and
There you
be in
go.
this trail race through elephant country.
So
All right. Now, before we run out of
Yeah.
time, as a race director, you got to meet a lot of athletes.
Yes.
I'm going to drop Doug Curtis's name as one. I know Doug. I read he ran your race twice.
Yep.
You've got to have, and you don't need to talk about Doug because he's our neighbor as well, and he'll probably find us and,
Yeah.
and give us a piece of his mind. But any interesting tidbits, stories, anecdotes? You hear about elite athletes, and sometimes they're very demanding. Sometimes, if they're like Dick Beardsley, they'll do anything you ask of them and smile while they're doing it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
We get elite athletes are like anybody else. They have personalities and there are certain entitlements and things like that. And probably there was an athlete, South African athlete that we brought in. He was, I think, a 2:15 marathoner. So it was a good time for the era. Wasn't great, but we brought this
Yeah.
guy in from his training camp, and he missed the start. So I'm at the start. I'm looking. I check all the athletes. I get little kids, move them back to their proper corral. And I don't see this guy. And so anyway, I'm like, okay, he just write him off. So we start the race. Anyway, at the finish, I'm standing at the finish line, and this guy, South African guy, comes running in at about 2 hours and 50 minutes. And he comes across the finish line, and it's the guy, it's the athlete. And I was like, oh man, you must have just had a really bad day. He stands up, he pulls out this wet piece of paper,
Right.
and he says, I had to take a taxi to the start. And he wanted me to reimburse him at the finish line for his $12 taxi fee because he missed the van to take him to
Oh my
the line.
gosh.
I couldn't believe it.
Oh.
But most of the
Well,
athletes,
I'm sure you saw all
are-
types of people.
we did drug testing for about 15 years and we only caught one drug cheat. And we had athletes. Yeah, we only caught one. And the guy had 3 different drugs in his system. He had a steroid, he had a EPO, and he had a masking agent. And,
Oh my.
it was discouraging because that was our first year back offering prize money because we went through a period, where we couldn't make the business decision to offer prize money because we didn't have any cash sponsors. So the first year back, we offer prize money, and our winner is a drug cheat. And at least it validated our decision for 15 years to do drug testing. We had athletes who would they would run Houston. This is the classic doper profile. They would run Houston. They'd run 2:11. They would come to my race, run 2:15, and then they'd go to LA in March and they'd run 2:12. So they'd pick up paydays in all 3 cities. And I would have drug tested them. Houston drug tested them, and then they get popped at LA. So you're like, okay, 3 months, January, February, March, you run 3 marathons and nobody's ever heard of you. And then you go back to Mexico where, doping control can't find you. So it was really frustrating.
It had to be. And John, the 1 year, the present mayor of Minneapolis won your race.
Great guy.
Tell us who that is.
Jacob Fry and Mike Sayen.
Right.
Won 2. We had an international marathon challenge that year. Again, I was just trying to keep it fresh. People didn't know who some of the.
That was so cool.
Yeah, thank you. So we did this international marathon challenge in Britain, Kenya, Mexico, U.S., Malawi, and Canada, I think. So the British Federation wouldn't recognize us at all. So, but fortunately, the runners we had invited had their own British running kits. So they had the official outfit. In fact, Lucy Hassel won our women's race. She was a British runner. On the Kenyan side, Kenyan Federation wouldn't acknowledge our event either. So we had to go out and buy Nike stuff, and we created virtual Kenyan uniforms for them. So on race day, we had all these countries out there, and the Kenyans just ran like Kenyans and figured it was going to be 1-2 with the Kenyans. And with about a mile and a half to go, Jacob and Mike, you could just see them working together, I don't know if you know Mike Sayenko. He ended up running, I think, 2:11. And
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, Jacob. Boy, you could just tell when they came around the corner to come down Congress Avenue. At that point, they still had, I think, 4 blocks, so about 1,200 feet um, to finish. And Jacob just put on the burners, and Sayenko. So we got top two that year, plus Lucy Hassel, British girl, winning the women's side. The U.S. women's team won the cash prize, and same with the men. It was great. It was fantastic.
Yeah,
Right, and
that was so
Mike
cool.
But
Sayenko
have you
and
ever thought about writing a book, John? Have you ever thought about putting together a manual or anything or not?
my memory is getting so bad these days. I have to go back and I keep these daytimer calendars. I've kept them for about, this is old school stuff, Um,
Yeah.
but this is how I organize myself, and I'd have to go back and look at some of these to trigger some memories. But in the sport, I've been fortunate to meet athletes like you guys, and to know people like Dickie, for just great people for decades. I've been a runner. This
Right.
will be going on 55 years as a runner. I still hobble. Mike, I saw you. You're a cyclist now,
Yes.
and I am just grateful for. I do 5K a day, 6 days a week, and I try to throw in about a mile of running in that 5K. And, I want to do a race in Weaverville. I drive down Main Street from the post office to the elementary school is
Yeah.
exactly a
When you
mile.
said Main Street Mile, that'd be perfect.
It's a downhill, straight shot, run them
Oh,
in a
Oh,
bubble.
it'd be sub 4.
Yeah, you get the bicycle club to run a bubble around them with a cop in front and a cop in back, and you send people off in waves. And they start off in the parking lot of the post office, and they finish at the elementary school. And you have a big party down there.
oh,
They go across the street to Twisted Laurel as a sponsor. So I'm going to tap into your expertise, Mike. Too.
John, between you, Mike Dunlap, and Doug
Curtis.
Doug Curtis,
Yeah.
it's gonna get done. And listen, we could go on and on and on. And John, I cannot thank you enough. We're heading towards 50 minutes, and we could talk for 5 hours. And we appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. And we want to thank everybody for listening. And if you have any questions for Dunn or myself or comments about the show, you can contact us directly on our website at beardsanddunpod.com, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X, all at Beards and Dun Pod.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love to get a comment. Hey, subscribe, and that way you'll get a notification whenever these things come up. And so, John, this has been just a joy, and the fact that we live so close, I definitely would, you and I can continue this conversation for
absolutely,
hours and
yeah.
hours. And Dickie's going to try to get out here. Between the two of us, I think we can convince Dick and Jill to come visit one of these days.
We got to do that.
I think so. We'll get you to
John,
move out here. We have plenty of lakes, lots of.
all right.
We'd have to teach him how to fly fish, though.
Oh,
that's the
Oh
problem.
no! If I can't fish in my boat, I ain't fishing. Hey, John, thanks, buddy. Say hi to Stace. Mikey, thanks, pal. I gotta
Have a
go.
great day.
Yep.
All right,
Take care, you guys.
Bye bye.